You really need to hear what these two men encountered in the Appalachian Mountains, because what happened to them out there didn't just end the hunt, it ended everything. In July of 2018, deep within the backcountry of Great Smoky Mountains National Park along the Tennessee-North Carolina border, two lifelong hunting partners pushed into a remote, off-trail drainage known locally as Laurel Fork Hollow. A patch of old-growth timber so dense and isolated that it sits more than 11 miles from the nearest paved road and doesn't appear on any trail map the Park Service publishes. Everything seemed like another summer hunt until the second night in camp, when one of the men saw his partner standing 5 feet away, perfectly still, perfectly silent, staring at him. Except his partner was 50 yards down the trail. What had been standing next to him had no tracks in the mud, no heat signature, no sound when it left. And it knew things, specific things. It knew the words only these two men used with each other. The names, the habits, the exact rasp of a cough that one man had carried for 30 years. By the time they reached their truck, neither man had injuries. Neither man was missing. But the local search and rescue coordinator who debriefed them, off the record, said it was the first time in 22 years on the job that he sent 2 healthy survivors home and still filed a critical incident report. What you are about to hear is the account. His name is Mack Tillett, and this happened to him in the summer of 2018 in the Appalachian Mountains of East Tennessee. Mack Tillett was 58 and had spent more hours in the Smokies than in any house he ever lived in. His boots were Danner pronghorns, resoled twice. His pack was a 1994 Kelty External his late father-in-law gave him. He was not romantic about the woods. He was a mechanic about them. Sterling Vause was 63, 4 months retired from the Blount County Highway Department after 24 years on the same stretch of US 321. He had a raspy, chest-deep, throat-clear, pneumonia damage from 1997 that never fully healed. Mack could pick that sound out from 200 yards, specific as a fingerprint. 31st Summer Scout together, 3 days in Laurel Fork Hollow, mapping deer sign before bow season. Sterling had packed an extra day's food and a full thermos of black coffee. First summer in 31 years with no Monday shift to rush back to. Laurel Fork Hollow in July sounds like pressure. The creek was swollen and drowned out everything beneath it. No bird calls after 10. The heat silenced the canopy. Boot leather on river rock. The muffled knock of Sterling's thermos against his pack frame. One thing Mack noticed but didn't say. No squirrels. 30 years in this hollow. There were always squirrels. They made camp before last light. Best deer sign in 5 years. Sterling poured 2 thermos caps of coffee and handed one over without a word. "Hand me that map, son," he said, glassing the eastern ridge. He'd called Mack son since Mack's father died in 2003. Mack never registered it anymore. It was as unremarkable as breathing. Tying his bootlace on a flat-topped boulder near the tent, Mack noticed marks scratched into the rock. 4 vertical lines, each crossed by a diagonal. Old survey mark, maybe. He didn't look long. He moved on. That night, through the tent door, he glanced back at the boulder. The light was low and blue and going fast. He counted 7 marks. He was certain there had been 4. The second morning opened with a smell that didn't belong. Not rot. Something older than rot. Wet stone and iron, and something faintly sweet underneath. The way air smells at the mouth of a cave where nothing lives. Mack caught it first thing out of the tent, before coffee, before his boots were laced. He filed it under Creek Funk and moved on. Sterling stepped out behind him, wrinkled his nose, said nothing. By noon the smell was still there, It had not drifted or faded or changed with the wind. It was simply present, the way a sound is present when you cannot locate the source, no matter how hard you try. They split the drainage after breakfast the way they always did, Sterling working the eastern wall, Mack pushing west into the Laurel. Standard grid. 31 years of the same system. Sterling was glassing the high ridge from the same position as the morning before, working his slow right-to-left sweep the way he always did. In his peripheral vision, close, right side, a figure registered, orange vest, the right build, the right posture. He didn't look directly at it because it was obviously Mack, standing nearby, probably watching something Sterling hadn't spotted yet. He kept the binos up and worked his grid. After 30 seconds, the figure hadn't moved or made a sound. Sterling lowered the binoculars and turned. No one was there. The mud where the figure had stood was undisturbed. Mack was 50 yards down the trail, crouched over a track, his back to Sterling, completely absorbed. To get there without Sterling hearing him, he would have had to cross 6 inches of dry leaves in total silence. That wasn't possible. Sterling put the binoculars back up. He told himself the July heat does things to peripheral vision. He was maybe halfway convinced of it. When they regrouped at camp for a midday water break, Mack looked at Sterling's face and asked plainly, "You good?" Sterling said he was fine. He cleared his throat, that specific, raspy, chest-deep rattle, the pneumonia sound Mack had been hearing for 24 years. "Good," Mack said, and left it there. 40 minutes later, Mack was working the laurel thicket on the drainage's west wall, moving slow, watching his footing in the tangle of exposed roots. The creek noise was lower here, muffled by the canopy. He was maybe 100 yards from camp, deep enough in the laurel that the daylight came through in narrow pieces. He heard it from directly behind him, 8 feet back, inside the thicket. Sterling's throat clear. The exact rattle. The specific frequency of those specific damaged lungs. Mack didn't think. "You all right, Sterl?" From across the drainage, 90 yards east easily, Sterling's voice came back. "I'm way over here, Mack. Why are you whispering?" Mack turned around. The laurel behind him was still. No broken branches. No disturbed ground. Nothing had pushed through that tangle without leaving a mark. The smell from that morning was stronger here, close and immediate, cave cold and iron, and that wrong sweetness that coated the back of the throat and wouldn't leave. When Mack told Sterling what he'd heard, Sterling didn't say it was the woods playing tricks. He didn't reach for an explanation. He looked at Mack for a long moment with an expression Mack couldn't read and said, "How many times?" Mack said once. Sterling nodded slowly. "Don't answer it again." He didn't explain. He went back to glassing. Mack wanted more than that. He didn't get it. They broke back toward camp before dark, moving faster than necessary, not talking about why. The campfire caught easily, burning high and yellow the way a fire does when the air is bone dry. Except the air wasn't dry. It hadn't been dry since they arrived. The wood had no business burning that clean and that high. Mack sat across from Sterling and watched the fire and tried to work out the math on what he'd heard in the thicket. The math wasn't adding up. He glanced at the flat boulder by the tent door. He hadn't meant to look. He counted the marks before he could stop himself. 9. The temperature dropped 15 degrees as dusk settled into the hollow. Not gradually, in a single 10-minute window, as if something large turned a dial. The Smokies in July don't do this. Both men knew it. Mack's skin went tight and cold the way it does before a serious storm, but the sky above the canopy was clear and salted with stars. The cold was coming from inside the hollow itself, from the ground up, from the creek bank outward, spreading the way cold spreads from a concrete floor up through the soles of your boots when you've been standing too long. By full dark, both men were in their sleeping layers beside the fire, which was wrong for July in Tennessee, in a way neither one said out loud. At approximately 9:15, the creek went quiet. Not quieter. Quiet. The full-volume constant roar that had been the auditory backdrop of every waking moment since they arrived simply stopped. Not faded, stopped. Both men froze mid-sentence. Sterling's mouth was still open. The absence of the creek was louder than the creek had been. In the silence, the hollow had the acoustic quality of a sealed room, enclosed, pressurized, listening to itself. Then, from the tree line 40 yards north, their own conversation from that morning. Not exact. The cadence was wrong, stretched and compressed in the wrong places, like a recording being spooled by hand. Mack's voice, then Sterling's, then Mack's again, talking about the truck starter, talking about the workshop roof, talking about 30 years of the same hollow and the same season and the same coffee. Both men recognized their own voices immediately. That was the specific horror of it. Not that something was mimicking them, but that the mimicry was close enough that for 1/2 second, each man looked at the other and wondered. Sterling stood up and faced the tree line. "We hear you," he said. Flat. Clear. Mack grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. That decision, Sterling facing it, naming it, acknowledging it out loud, split the two men in a way the next 12 hours would not resolve. Mack believed it made things worse. Sterling never changed his position. The tree line gave nothing back for a long moment. Then it stopped replaying the full conversation and began extracting. From the darkness, in Sterling's voice, pitch perfect, rattle and all, a single word. Sun. Once. Natural cadence. The way Sterling had always said it. The way he'd said it 10,000 times over 31 years. Then again, slightly faster. Then again, the gap between repetitions shortening, the word beginning to lose its shape. Sun, 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 accelerating past the speed a human mouth could form it, until it sounded less like a word and more like a frequency. Like something that had found the single most specific, most loaded piece of language between two men and was using it to cut straight through. Both men stopped looking at the tree line. They started looking at each other. That was the shift. The mimic didn't just scare them, it made them doubt each other. Mack looked at Sterling's face, and for one long, terrible moment could not be certain the thing in the tree line wasn't Sterling, and the man sitting next to him wasn't something else wearing him well. The thought arrived, and he couldn't unthink it. Sterling saw it happen, saw the look move across Mack's face, and his expression closed down in a way Mack had never seen in 31 years. The accelerating sun stopped. Suddenly. Completely. The way the creek had stopped. Silence moved back in. Both men made a silent mutual decision without speaking. Stay put, stay visible, don't move until dawn. They had enough wood. The fire would hold. If they kept it fed and kept each other in sight, and gave whatever was in that tree line nothing new to work with, they could wait it out. That was the plan. It was the only plan available to them. Then, from directly behind Mack's left shoulder, so close it stirred the hair at the back of his neck, the specific sound of a boot shifting its weight on dry leaves. He didn't turn around. The fire had burned low. Orange coals. No flame. The smell was total now. Iron and cave cold and that sweet wrongness, filling the hollow the way water fills a low place. Mack's hands were shaking, not from the cold, from the effort of keeping them still. Across the dying fire, Sterling sat with his elbows on his knees and his face in the coal light was the face of a man doing arithmetic he didn't like the answer to. The tree line was 15 feet of absolute dark past the edge of the firelight. And in that dark, something was assembling itself. It took longer than it should have, not what it became, but the time it needed to become it. Darkness reorganizing itself with patience, with deliberateness. And then it settled. It settled into the shape of Mack Tillett. The 1994 Kelty external frame, the orange vest, the slight forward lean he'd carried in his shoulders for 30 years, from crawl spaces and low ceilings. His rifle, held the way he held it, weight left, barrel angled down and outward. The figure stood at the edge of the firelight and did not move toward them. It held its shape and watched. Sterling's eyes went to it, then to Mack's face, then back. The look he wore was not fear, something worse. The expression of a man running a calculation he couldn't afford to get wrong. Mack breathed. The figure breathed. Mack's right hand trembled against his knee. Fine, involuntary, impossible to stop. The figure's right hand trembled in the same rhythm, same amplitude, same frequency. When Mack's jaw tightened, the figure's jaw tightened. When his eyes moved left, tracking a sound from the dark past Sterling's shoulder, the figure's eyes moved with them. It was not imitating him. It was indexing him in real time, receiving every input and returning it perfectly, with no delay between the original and the copy. The horror was not that it looked like Mack. The horror was that it looked like Mack looking at himself. Sterling's hand found Mack's wrist. 2 fingers. Steady. Eye contact. What Sterling communicated without a word. Do not give it anything. No sound, no movement, no input. The thing learned from interaction. Every sound they'd made since arriving, cataloged. Every word, every throat clear, every boot shift. Go silent. Go still. Deny it the data. The mirroring would lose its resolution. Mack went still. What followed was 4 hours. 2 men completely motionless beside a dying fire, while a perfect copy of one of them stood 15 feet away and mirrored every involuntary tremor, every blink, every shallow breath. The temperature dropped. The coals went from orange to red to gray. The dark pressed inward as the light died and the figure pressed with it, more resolved, more accurate, more present, without ever taking a step. At approximately the 2-hour mark, Sterling coughed. Not a choice. The wet pneumonia rattle his lungs produced involuntarily, suppressed for as long as physically possible, forcing itself out into the silence like a door off its hinges. The figure did not cough back. It did something worse. It produced the sound of the cough inverted, same frequency, same rhythm, but reversed, a negative image of the sound pressed into the silence around it. And the mirroring of Mack sharpened instantly, more resolved, more present, as if the cough had been a payment and the figure had just collected it. Sterling's hand tightened on Mack's wrist. Neither man made another sound. The first gray light bled into the canopy at 5:47. Mack knows because he counted seconds for the last 90 minutes. 1 1,000, 2 1,000. The way his father taught him to measure lightning distance when he was 7. The color was not sunrise. It was the specific pre-dawn gray with no color in it, only luminosity. The way light looks before the sun has a direction. In that light, the figure began to lose resolution. The Kelty frame blurred first, then the orange vest, then the shape itself, not vanishing but dissolving backward into the dark, the way morning fog dissolves from the bottom up in a hollow. One layer at a time, in no hurry. It had been in no hurry about any of this. Then it was gone. The creak came back immediately, full volume, as if it had never stopped. The coals were black. The fire was dead. Mack looked at the flat boulder by the tent door and did not count the marks. He would not count them. He picked up his pack and walked to the trail. Sterling followed. They left everything: tent, sleeping pads, the Kelty frame, the PLB with its amber light still cycling, and walked 11 miles back to the truck without a word between them. The inside of Mack's truck smelled like motor oil and old coffee and the synthetic vanilla of an air freshener his daughter hung on the rearview mirror 2 years ago. The engine turned over on the third try. The heater came on. These were the most ordinary sounds in the world, and they arrived like a wrong answer. The ordinary world simply resuming without asking permission, indifferent to the fact that 2 men were sitting inside it who could no longer fully trust the shape of a familiar voice. They drove the 47 miles from the Laurel Fork trailhead back to Maryville in total silence. Not the silence they'd shared for 31 years, the easy, companionable quiet that never needed filling, that felt like an extension of the same thought. This was different. This was the silence of 2 men, each privately performing the same terrible exercise, testing whether the person in the seat beside them was the one they had always known, or something that had learned him thoroughly enough to replace him. Neither man completed the test. Neither could complete it. That was exactly the point. Mack did not cry on the drive home. He ate a bowl of cereal at his kitchen counter at 6:30 in the morning standing up, because sitting down did not occur to him. He showered. He drove to a parts store and bought a starter motor for his 2004 Silverado and installed it in his driveway alone. And when he finished, he spent 20 minutes torquing bolts that were already properly torqued. Sterling called 2 weeks later, left a voicemail. Mack listened to it twice. He did not call back. He told his daughter, when she asked why he didn't see Sterling anymore, that they had just drifted apart. She found this strange. They had been inseparable for her entire life. The story opened with Sterling saying son. Once, natural, unremarkable, the way a man says a thing he has said 10,000 times. It closes here. Mack listening to that voicemail and his body, not his mind, his body, receiving the sound of that voice the way it received the sound from inside the laurel thicket on the second afternoon, as a thing that could be real, and could be something else, with no reliable way to determine the difference. He deleted the voicemail. He has not listened to anyone's voicemail since. 2 men walked out of the Appalachian Mountains without injuries, without missing time, without a single loss any official report could name. The search and rescue coordinator who met them in a parking lot in Gatlinburg filed a critical incident report with no incident. An $11,000 gear set is still somewhere in Laurel Fork Hollow inside Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and no one has retrieved it. By the following spring, Mack Tillett's name no longer appeared in Sterling Vause's phone, not erased, removed. The way you remove something not out of anger, but because keeping it there produces a response you don't have a name for. In these Appalachian Mountains, the wilderness doesn't always take what you fear losing. Sometimes it takes the thing that made you certain you could recognize what was real. On the flat-topped boulder at the base of Laurel Fork Hollow, the scratch marks are still there. A Park Service trail crew logged it in a 2019 vegetation survey. The crew member counted the marks carefully. Her field notes recorded 11 vertical lines, each crossed by a diagonal. She also noted that her count came out different the second time. She didn't try a third time.